weak tree limbs, dead trees, dead standing trees, trees that are leaning. You don't want to camp under any of that stuff or really even near it. Because if you're in that path of a tree falling or a limb falling, you don't want to be in that path where you're setting up camp and just where you're planning on having your fire, where you're planning on cooking the kitchen area, so to speak, especially where you're sleeping. But any of that in and around camp, you just want to look up into those trees and make sure there's nothing dead. There's nothing just hanging there waiting for some wind to blow it loose and to fall. See that lone pine up on that hill over there? What are we actually doing right now? The kids are just wild out there. They're wild. But they're having a good time, you know? They're having a good time. This is Untamed, Unbroken, The Adventurer's Guide, and I'm your host, Blake Bredesen. Welcome back to part 5 of our wilderness camping series. Today we're talking about camp setup, management, selecting that ideal campsite, camp setup strategies, establishing a comfortable campsite if that's what you're looking for, talking about environmental considerations, and a little bit on minimizing impact, leave no trace, which we'll talk about towards the end in greater detail. I'm just going to touch on that aspect a little bit, but let's get right into it. Selecting that ideal campsite. So this is all about creating an efficient and comfortable and environmentally responsible campsite so that you can have a good time and you leave things how you found it. So selecting that campsite it's important for a few reasons. Safety being number one, comfort number two, and minimizing environmental impact. So assessing safety and the suitability. So you're looking at natural hazards. You want to identify potential risks in like flood zones, avalanche paths, unstable ground, areas prone to rock falls. A big one where I'm from is deadfall, weak tree limbs, dead trees, dead standing trees, trees that are leaning. You don't want to camp under any of that stuff or really even near it. Because if you're in that path of a tree falling or a limb falling, you don't want to be in that path where you're setting up camp, even just where you're planning on having your fire, where you're planning on cooking the kitchen area, so to speak, especially where you're sleeping. But any of that in and around camp, you just want to look up into those trees and make sure there's nothing dead. There's nothing just hanging there waiting for some wind to blow it loose and to fall. Weak tree limbs, all that stuff. You're looking for that and you're avoiding those things. You want to look at terrain and ground conditions. Ideally, if you're in a tent, you're looking for flat level ground. If you're in a hammock, you're looking for a couple of nice trees, again, without any of those limbs above you looking like they're going to fall on you, or there is a limb just hung up. You want to avoid the widowmakers, as they call them. Avoid areas where rainwater can collect, or they're going to avoid it, avoiding those areas where you could get washed out a little bit, or where excessive water is going to get to where your tent is or something like that. Water source proximity, ideally, you'd like to be close to a water source if you can. Just make sure you're disposing of waste away from that water source. A couple 100 feet is usually what they recommend, 200 feet away from water sources for any kind of human waste. You're washing dishes, that water, that dirty water, that type of stuff. A lot of wilderness areas will have rules, like the boundary waters, like you're definitely camping near the water, but they want all that other stuff. They don't want you contaminating the water. You're going to want to factor in exposure to the elements, weather. Are you in a colder climate, a hotter environment, and what that landscape looks like, factoring in wind, sun, potential rain or weather, Use natural features like tree lines or rock formations as windbreaks. You can orient your tent or camp so it's facing the sun, if you're in that colder area, colder climate, or for the shade. All things to consider when you're setting up camp. Maybe if you're dispersed camping, a lot of wilderness areas, they have designated campsites. And so in that case, you're just trying to find a campsite that maybe is one less buggy. So maybe it's out on a point or in an area that wind can blow through it, and it's not in this kind of stagnant area. If you can pick and choose those campsites, and if you are like in the boundary waters, if you're getting there, when you leave on your entry date, it is very helpful to be at that access point early in the morning, because then you're going to get those campsites are first come, first serve. You're going to have the best chance to get a good campsite, or one that you have your eye on, type of thing. But if it's dispersed camping, then you need to factor in all these things. Even in the boundary waters, you especially need to factor in the widowmakers, the dead trees, dead branches, the limbs that are just hanging there waiting for that wind. Those are the biggest things to think about there. As far as leave no trace and designated campsites, existing sites, if there's an existing site, pick that one versus creating a new one. It's a good practice. It helps concentrate that impact to fewer areas, preserves the landscape a little bit better. Be aware of wildlife activity in the area. If you're seeing a lot of wildlife activity, try to avoid disturbing their habitats. If you're seeing animal tracks, if you're in bear country, be aware, right, of what's going on there. Camp setup strategies. Let's get into that one. So just site prep, tent orientation, talks about that just a little bit. You want to make sure you anchor that thing down, and just we'll talk a little bit on organizing campsite and then establishing a comfortable campsite if that's what you're into. So big one with site prep is just clearing the area, getting flat and level as much as you can. Avoid digging trenches or altering that site if you can. A lot of places have rules like you're not supposed to dig trenches. Rocks, sticks, remove those sharper objects so you're not just poking a hole in the bottom of your tent. Orientation. So positioning your tent's entrance away from prevailing winds if you are in a windy area. Again, warmth. If it's colder, you want to face that thing, put that thing in the sun, or in the shade, depending on the weather. Make sure that tent is staked down. The guy lines are out. Sandy, snowy conditions, specialized stakes, ice anchors, whatever it might be. Make sure it's anchored. Let's talk about organizing your campsite. A lot of times we'll set up our tents or set up the sleeping area a little further away from where the fire is, where you're going to kind of be throughout the day. If you are in one site for a period of time, if you're just sleeping there for the night, then things are generally quick. You're not worried about the kind of the comfort side of things and setting up an area for cooking or sleeping, and all of that. So, but you want to set up some distinct areas. A lot of times it all revolves around the fire. Most of the time this is where the fire is going to be. And it's nice in the boundary waters specifically. There's a lot of the campsites have benches that are already made. You can sit on some log benches right around the fire. You are required to have if you are making a fire or having a fire, it has to be in the pit that is there in those areas, in those designated sites. Have a fire grate. You have to have the fires in the grate. Waste management. If you're in an area that doesn't have a latrine or an outdoor toilet, Cat holes, man. Dig them 6 to 8 inches deep or so. Fill them in afterwards. Throw a rock on there. Make sure you're packing out your trash. Following those leave no trace principles. I'll say that over and over again, probably, but it's true. Just leave things like you found them or better. All right. We're talking about campsite and establishing a comfortable campsite, right? If you're going to be there for a few days, this is where this kind of comes into effect. But you want things to be comfortable and functional. I'm always function first most of the time. Organizing your gear in the inside your tent, using the mesh pockets. Maybe you got some hooks that you use in your tent. This also is going to depend on how heavy you're packing, how light you're packing, and how important that is to you. And if you're ultra light, you're probably not taking some of these steps. But just things to organize even inside of your tent is super helpful. Keeping that entrance clean. Even a small foldable mat at the entrance, that's a luxury item. But it doesn't have to be anything crazy or that takes up a ton of space. Pillow. Bring a pillow. I always bring a pillow. It's a luxury item it's a small pillow. It's nothing crazy. The one I have is just got it on Amazon, Teton Sports. I have 2 of them. And it's an actual pillow. It's not one of the blow up ones. So it's a little bulkier, but I've tried the blow up ones. I don't really like them. There are some other ones out there that are kind of a combination where they are a little bit padded and they have some foam in them, but they also blow up. I would try those. I haven't yet, but pillows super nice. Making sure your tent has good ventilation is a big one, especially depending on the year. Open up those vents during the day. Open them up. Let them air out. Creating functional zones in camp. Clearly designating this area is for cooking. We eat here, lounge here type of thing. A lot of times, like I said prior, this revolves around where your fire is. We like to put up a tarp, or I like to put up a tarp in camp, sometimes over the fire or right at the edge of the fire, tilted so it lets that smoke escape. You're not just going to smoke yourselves out or anything like that. We like to do that when we go on, group trips for when it does rain, because it seems like it always rains at some point. And having that tarp up, then you just can chill. You can hang out under that tarp. We bring collapsible chairs, little folding chairs. You just sit out there and you can hang out and have a good time, even if it is raining. Bringing a hammock, another great addition if you want to, if you're not afraid of packing a little extra weight. Organizational tools, like I said, a really good one is just like some webbing that you can put around a tree with hooks, and you can hang stuff. Clothesline, obviously, another good one. Just some basic things to keep things a little bit more organized out there. Now let's talk about some environmental considerations. Water usage, using biodegradable soap, just making sure you're disposing of that dishwater well away from any water sources. And food storage, properly storing food. Don't feed the bears, don't feed the animals. Use a bear canister if that's what you got. Otherwise, you hang your food 12 feet up, 4 feet out. And we'll talk a little bit more about food and stuff when we talk about the bear proofing and wildlife safety. That's part 6. That'll come up. Minimize your impact. Campfires, wildlife interaction. I feel like I shouldn't even have to say this, but don't feed the animals. Don't feed the wildlife. Don't be stupid. Store food and scented items securely, like I said, either in that food bag, hanging up on a limb, up away off the ground, or in a bear proof or bear resistant container. Don't bring that food into your tents. Don't bring scented items like toothpaste into your tent. When it comes to campfires, use existing fire rings. Keep those fires small. Collecting dead, downed wood, dead standing. I think dead standing is fine pretty much everywhere. I don't see why it wouldn't be. Maybe there are places that don't allow you to cut down dead standing. And goes without saying, fire safety. When you're done, make sure those ashes are cool, and you've scattered them. All right. The last thing here when it comes to your campsite is just briefly, when you do leave the campsite, site restoration, dispersing gathered rocks or sticks, making it look like you were never there. If you don't fill in your cat holes right away after you're done, make sure those are covered. Make sure, fill those back in with dirt, throw a rock on them, some sticks, whatever. Make it look like there is nothing there. You can go as far as erasing the signs of your tent, or the footprint of your tent, or your footprints themselves. And last but not least, things packed up. Make sure you do a sweep through the campsite, making sure all that micro trash is picked up. Make sure there's no pieces of gear. Sometimes things fall, they blend in really well. Just make sure that that place is cleaner, as clean as you found it, or cleaner. All right. That does it for today. The biggest things here with site selection is the safety aspect. Making sure there's no dead limbs, making sure there's no dead trees near your campsite or where you're sleeping, making sure you plan accordingly with the weather and what's going on there. This is a big one for having a good trip wherever you're going. Having a nice campsite can really make quite a huge difference. One, in morale, in keeping your spirits up. If you got a cool site, it's kind of makes you not want to leave. So there you have it, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Next one, we're going to be talking about bear proofing, wildlife safety, going in depth on that. And that'll be part 6. So stay tuned and stay wild. Thank you for sticking around. If you've enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating and review. Even one word, it helps a ton. Sincerely appreciate you guys. Thank you all, and we'll see you on the next one. Stay wild.
You've been listening to Untamed, Unbroken, a Lone Pine Adventures original podcast.